And now, the Progressive Era with Stephen Ott.
Oh, hello there. Welcome to AP U.S. History. Today we will be discussing the Progressive Era and how it changed the United States forever. The Progressive Era was a time of social change in America. One of the main focuses of this time of change was labor. By the 1890s, monopolies had taken over almost all of their respective industries like Standard Oil and U.S. Steel. So in 1890, Congress passed the Sherman Antitrust Act, which gave the president power to break up monopolies and trusts. The Homestead Strike in 1892 was when laborers for Carnegie Steel, when they tried a sit-in strike, which is when workers stay inside the factory, not allowing anybody to come in and do their jobs or let management have access to the equipment. Carnegie subsequently hired the Pinkertons, which is a private military which was authorized to break up the strike using force, and it proved to be a major defeat for labor because the laborers' needs weren't met. They were all fired, and they were soon replaced. So that didn't go very well for them. In 1902, President Roosevelt became the first one to use the Sherman Antitrust Act when he broke up J.P. Morgan's monopoly on railroad shipping and freight rates. This was followed by the Elkins Act in 1903, which made it a crime for railroad rates to change. The railroad rates were being jacked up so high that farmers couldn't turn a profit because of how much money it was costing them to ship their goods from their farm to the cities to have them sold. And if you can't do that, well, you can't make any money. In 1905, the Industrial Workers of the World was founded. It was founded so that workers across all industries could unite to strike and work better so that they could improve their wages, their benefits, and the safety of their factories and places of work. In 1906, the book The Jungle was released. The Jungle chronicled how meatpacking factories were just so disgusting and terrible. It literally was so bad that the federal government introduced not one, not two, but 3 different acts. The Pure Food and Drug Act, the Meat Inspection Act, and the Hepburn Act, all regulating the meat industry. I guess it must have been a pretty good book, but Miss Fair says it's boring. The Panic of 1907 occurred in 1907. J.P. Morgan bailed out the U.S. government. This is how much money J.P. Morgan had. The U.S. government ran out of money, and J.P. Morgan was like, oh, I'll just give you guys some of mine. You know, no big deal, right? A year later, in the Supreme Court case, Mueller v. Oregon, the Supreme Court ruled that women should have maximum working hours because they were mothers who got pregnant. And I don't understand the rationale. Our Supreme Court, they made some stupid decisions, and this is one of them. This is in top 5. I mean, it's not Scott v. Sanford, but it's pretty bad. In 1911, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire occurred in New York City, killing dozens of people as they were locked into their workplace by their employers because the employers were so scared their employees would just up and walk out because of the terrible working conditions. There was no air, there was no ventilation, probably very little food, very poor hours. And then one day a fire occurred in the factory. With no way to get out, workers were either stuck, the fire department couldn't reach them, so many were forced to jump out windows to their deaths. It proved to be a turning point in labor because people just saw how horrific it was and how bad things were getting that something had to change. And it did. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire occurred to several things happening in government. The Sherman Antitrust Act was enforced much more, and many more monopolies were broken up, especially under President Taft. But really, the only judge of good and bad was President Roosevelt himself. Taft, on the other hand, just saw trusts and decided they were all bad. So all the trusts got broken up. In addition to this, the Federal Trade Commission was established in 1914 to regulate trade across the nation. Also in that same year, the Ludlow Massacre occurred in Chicago, where laborers were striking for better wages when suddenly a bomb was thrown into the crowd. And to this day, no one knows who threw the bomb, if it was laborers or anti-union counter-protesters. I'm not even sure what you would call them. And thus concludes our section on labor. Now, let's talk about social reform in the United States during the Progressive Era. In 1890, the National American Women's Suffrage Association was founded. It was founded so that women could organize and protest to try to obtain their civil liberties, like, being able to vote. In 1892, the Populist Party was founded. Popular meaning people, the People's Party, and the people were farmers. Giselle got that one. In 1896, Plessy v. Ferguson, again with the great Supreme Court cases, Plessy v. Ferguson ruled that public facilities could be separate but equal. because that in itself is not contradictory.
Alright, sir, let me get your finest water here.
Here you go, sir.
Oh, can we get 2 waters, please?
Here you go, ma'am.
I'm sorry, can we get that water?
No. Look at the color of your skin and look at the color of my skin.
You know when I mentioned Mueller v. Oregon was in my top 5 worst Supreme Court cases? This one's... There's Scott v. Sanford, and then there's this one. In 1904, the Niagara Movement started in Niagara, hence the term Niagara Movement. The Niagara Movement was simply leaders of the black community that got together because they wanted more equality for all races in the United States. In 1908, the FBI was established. James Comey! But back then, it wasn't a source of national controversy. Back then, it was just simply founded to, investigate crimes that cross state lines. In 1913, the 16th and 17th Amendments were both passed. The 16th Amendment, for the first time ever, established an income tax. The 17th Amendment was an idea that was founded by Teddy Roosevelt, that senators should be picked by a popular vote. Before this, they were picked by the representative legislature of each state. In 1918, the Sedition Act was included to the Espionage Act. We're fast-forwarding a bit, because now at this point World War I is broken out. Pretend that I'm in World War I right now, and I said, I don't think we should be fighting this war. The Sedition Act made it illegal for me to do so, and I could be jailed. It's a clear violation of your First Amendment right, but the whole idea behind it was that American people shouldn't be demoting the war effort at home. Also, in that same year, Eugene B. Debs was convicted under this Espionage Act for what I just said because he spoke out against the war effort. In 1919, Prohibition was passed with the 18th Amendment. It made it illegal for you to purchase alcohol, a little bit ahead of the Progressive Era. It was later repealed because the government was missing out on so much money off the sale of alcohol that they just had to bring it back. In 1920, because in 1917, Russia had the Russian Revolution, then a couple months later the Bolshevik Revolution installed, communist leader, AP World History people. You know me, you know what I'm talking about. America doesn't really like communists. Like, you ever heard of McCarthyism? Because we do not like communism, alright? This all started in 1920 with the first Red Scare. The FBI would literally break into suspected communist homes and look through all their things. They were called Palmer raids. And they would look through people's stuff under the suspicion of them being communists. Also in that same year, the 19th Amendment was passed giving women the right to vote because, women are people too. And thus concludes our social reform aspect of the Progressive Era. Moving on to the final section of our video. In 1893, Grover Cleveland was elected president. In the same year, we deposed the Hawaiian monarchy because we were like, Hawaii's kind of nice, and we like pineapples. In 1901, Teddy Roosevelt, one of my all-time faves, love Teddy, he became president. And then in 1903, Teddy fulfilled one of his promises by taking the Canal Zone from the Panamanians. So we assisted the Panamanians in starting a revolution, and then we paid the Panamanians once they won the revolution for the Canal Zone. So we got our canal. That's how Teddy worked, just, I want it, so I'll work around you. In 1904, President Roosevelt released the Roosevelt Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine just said that the old world can no longer interfere with the business of the new world. It prevented further colonization, but the Roosevelt Corollary added to it by saying that the U.S. now had a policing power in the Western Hemisphere. And I'm pretty sure nowadays we've expanded that power to the entire world and thrown in Mars and the moon while we're at it. In 1909, William Taft became president. He was a Supreme Court justice. In 1915, the Lusitania sunk. It was carrying arms, but that wasn't known to the public at that time. What was known was that it killed about 100 Americans. This very much angered the American people as the Lusitania was sunk by a German U-boat, a new type of boat. We just call it a submarine now, but back then it was state-of-the-art technology. 2 years later, the Zimmermann Note was intercepted by British agents and shown to the U.S. The Zimmermann Note was a note from Germany which basically said, all that land that you lost to America during the Mexican-American War? You can have it back. You just need to help us win the war against the U.S. by declaring war on them. So on that note, literally on that note, the U.S. declared war on Germany, and after that it was all over. It was chaos for Germany. In 1918, the war ended. The Treaty of Versailles was formed, and right before its signing, Wilson gave us 14 points. The Treaty of Versailles was passed, levying heavy war fines and heavy war reparations against Germany. which they never recovered from until Adolf Hitler came to power. The U.S. ultimately rejected the Treaty of Versailles because we saw that it was only going to breed another war, which it did. And thus concludes the foreign policy section of our video, and thus concludes our video. Thank you. Stay classy, San Diego.
Thanks for watching. This has been the Progressive Era with Stephen